company was being foreclosed on by the Internal Revenue Service. How's that?
Those are terrorists, aren't they?
They are terrorists.
They can be sometimes.
They're terrorists. They're bigger terrorists than most people who basically are called terrorists. They're called IRS and other kind of things. But this company had been run by a man who was in his 80s, and he had some very successful years. His health turned sour, and he got so bad that he had to turn the company over to his wife to run. And she couldn't do it. She was 81 years old, thrust into running a small business. And this was small, 7 employees. And basically, the company had been out of control for the better part of a year. And it was still generating revenue. It was still, there were no financial statements. There were nothing that you would normally see. But I was able to buy it with a ridiculously low price offered to the IRS, who just wanted to get rid of it. They were going to shut it down and auction it off. And I was able to fix it up and sell it. And I didn't have to pay much more than a couple $1,000s for this, which I got that money back the first day in a very interesting story, which we won't get into today. But the point is, the company, I could see and identify opportunities without even knowing the product, and was able to pull it together quickly, and within 90 days the company was starting to shoot some nice profits out, and it's a good success story. Sold it a couple years later.
I know the story very well. I've heard it many times. I can probably tell it in almost as much detail as Jack does. I've heard it so many times. It's because it's a great story. But there's a couple things that jump out that kind of tie into what we've been discussing here so far today, Jack, and that is, it's an existing company. And so as you paint the story there, we had this, his wife, who was in her 80s, had not been in business
not my
ever.
Wife, the owner's wife.
Sorry, the owner's wife. No, Alice, not in her 80s yet. She's much younger. The owner's wife, who had no business experience, was thrust into that seat. The company kept on running. Now maybe they're missing some taxes or what have you, but the company was still operating. They still had 7 employees. Things were still kind of going on. One of the things that caught your eye when you were there visiting was the UPS guy coming.
That's right.
And he's delivering packages, dropping off, more stuff, picking up to be able to deliver.
There's always something in a situation like this. There's always something that says, hey, business is being done, and that's a good thing. Now, how much do I want to pay for it? That's the next thing.
So, but the idea, in this case, it was maybe, the company had been around for almost 40 years, so you had 4 decades of momentum carrying it to kind of start. And so, again, it's hard for a company to just go out of business and go to zero. And again, coming back to our discussion way back at the beginning of our program, right, Jack, about starting versus buying something that's already there. And once it started, there's momentum going. There's things that happen. People call in. That stuff shows up for a company that has been in existence for a while like that, versus starting from scratch where nobody knows about you, the phone's not ringing, emails aren't coming, people aren't walking in the door.
Contrast,
very, very different.
Huge
right?
contrast.
So the risk of
wait, so it comes back to, would you take it too?
Yeah, that's what I say. Yeah, so the risk of a couple $1,000s to try this and some of your time, it's a pretty low risk from that standpoint, right?
If you buy it right, like we also said.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's on my not to do list, which is don't buy it wrong. Which is saying buying it right. So what does buying it wrong look like? It looks like paying too much for it, or putting too much money down at the beginning if you're buying it wrong.
Both in price and terms, you're paying too much for it. You get emotionally attached, or you don't want to tender an offer that the owner might perceive as being insulting. Yeah, that's one of the craziest things I've ever heard. But
are you looking at my list over here, Jack?
Nope. Did you have that one too?
It's another of my not to do list. Okay, so don't worry about offending the seller. Okay, so don't do that. Don't worry about offending the seller.
Oh wait, why don't I just make a fair offer?
You can't bring that. You can't use that
word in there.
You can't use that word. That word's off limits for you, Jack.
That word is one of the worst words in
when
negotiation that exists.
When you're making an offer, because keep in mind, usually what happens is when the seller has an asking price, most often they cannot defend that selling price in terms of why they're asking for it. It might be because, hey, this is what I think this is the price that I need to sell it and walk away and retire. This is how much I feel I've invested in the company. This is what I owe. Whatever. There's often different reasons why they're putting that price on there. How you go about valuing and putting your value on it could be very, very different. So don't worry about offending the seller.
Yeah, it comes down to the company that you see is worth X to you, and that's it. And advance it, and that's worth X because you've studied it. You studied the company, the opportunities, weighed your skill level against this, and the price you're willing to pay, and that's it.
That's right.
So if it's miles apart, don't worry about it. Especially if the seller can't convince you, and he isn't going to, or she isn't going to.
Try to make an analogy here for folks who maybe they're more familiar with buying and selling of houses as opposed to maybe buying and selling companies, Jack. And if you ever had a house in the market, and all of a sudden it's crickets out there, there's nobody responding to you. When you get an offer, I don't care how good or bad that offer looks, there's excitement there. Hey, somebody wants what I've got to offer, right?
That's right.
So you have no idea how long this seller has been looking to sell the company, been thinking about selling the company. You have no idea how many offers they've received or haven't received yet. So put your offer out there.
Put your offer out there.
And as long as you're able to explain it, here's how I value the company, you can explain it, what's going on. That's a very, very important thing to be able to do. Now, very closely tied into that, this is another item on my not to-do list, Jack, which is don't spend too much time up front. Okay, so usually when you go into a company, now this didn't happen with the company that you were mentioning, Jack, which is usually there's a package of some type and kind, or you get some information. I know you didn't have really much at all other than that penciled out list of assets and inventory, right?
That's right. Yeah. No, yes. Yes.
So usually there's some sort of
little.
Usually there's some sort of package that includes maybe some financial statements or something that kind of shows you kind of what they've got. What we advise people to do is to take that at face value. Assume that what the seller is telling you is accurate and correct.
That's correct.
So start there. Don't spend untold hours or weeks digging in, doing diligence, spending all this time and effort, because what happens is you as the buyer become involved. You become emotional. It's kind of like the whole idea of being half pregnant. It doesn't work that way. The seller is already involved. It's their company.
Well, that's what my CPA or lawyer told me to do. How can I talk intelligently about my company without knowing what exists? So
Again,
I got to study it.
That's right.
It's the timing that you put in that effort that we're talking about.
A couple things. We encourage you to put all kinds of time before you write a check in, put money in, before you sign documents, okay? But to get to the point where you can make a non-binding letter of intent and get that company off the market so other folks aren't also looking at it. So you have that time, whether it be 45, 60, 90 days to do your proper diligence. That diligence is important, but the question of, to your point, Jack, is when do you do it? You don't do it right now before it's yours. So that's another thing, is don't spend too much time up front.
That's a big deal. You're right.
And two more things, and then we'll have to end our show, unfortunately, here. But don't wait too long to make an offer. That kind of ties in very closely to that, which is people will drag it out for weeks or months. Get there, get what they've got, and be relatively quick in making an offer. And now the first one is always the hardest to do because it's the first time you're doing it. But get the offer out. Once you get a first offer out, making a second offer to somebody else, it becomes a little bit easier because you have a sense of what it's like.
Yep, that's right.
Become a little more swashbuckling.
Swashbuckling, I like that.
I know you like that word, right?
That's a good one.
All right. And then last but not least, in terms of my not-to-do list, is do not tap all of your available resources to do your first deal.
Like empty my bank account
and borrow from friends, family, whatever else. Don't tap everything because it's going to put too much pressure on you to make this thing happen.
That's right. No, well, that's what buying it right is all about.
That's right. These all kind of tie together, but it's a couple of points I wanted to kind of bring up to make sure people are aware of those things. But you can buy a company.
Those are good points, Adam.
Thanks, Jack.
Those are very good points. And anyone can get one now. We tend to get a little snooty in terms of the offers provided to us. So if one says, "Hey, would you take this if they gave it to you?" Unless it's some huge EPA problem and legalities up the wazoo, of course I would. So structure the offer accordingly. Don't be so picky about what you want.
That's
the
right,
deal
Jack.
is what you're after.
All right, we're up against it, unfortunately.